The scent of baking bread used to be my anchor, a warm, yeasty hug that pulled me back to earth even on the most chaotic mornings. My bakery, Ilara's Hearth, was more than just a business. It was the beating heart of our little corner of Portland, a place where neighbors lingered over coffee, sharing stories, and laughing until their bellies ached. I, Ilara Vance, at 45 years old, had built that warmth with my own two hands, kneading love into every loaf, every pastry, every crumb cake that left my ovens. My life was simple, yes, but it was rich, filled with the satisfaction of creation and the quiet joy of community. Our neighborhood, Hawthorne Place, was known for its quirky independent shops and a fierce loyalty to its local businesses. We supported each other, a tapestry of dreamers and doers, woven together by shared ambition and a collective aversion to the soulless uniformity of chain stores. We were a family, really squabbling sometimes, but always there for each other when it mattered most. That's why, when Julian Thorne first arrived, slick and smiling, promising a brighter future, most of us were cautiously optimistic. He was a real estate developer, or so he claimed, with grand visions of revitalizing Hawthorne Place, transforming it into Portland's next big thing. He'd hold town hall meetings, always impeccably dressed, his voice a smooth baritone that promised prosperity and innovation. He'd talk about preserving the local charm, while subtly hinting at the untapped potential that stagnant businesses like mine were holding back. He even bought a few croissants from my bakery on his first visit, praising their flakiness with a theatrical flourish that made my stomach churn even as I smiled politely. Authentic, he'd called them, a word that felt like a backhanded compliment coming from him. Julian Thorne was charismatic, undeniably so. He had a way of looking you in the eye, making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your opinion mattered more than anything else in the world. He'd shake hands firmly, remember names, and offer seemingly genuine compliments. He spent weeks charming the city council, hosting lavish dinners, and even sponsoring local charity events. He was building an empire of goodwill, one carefully placed donation and persuasive speech at a time. The whispers started subtly at first, like a faint breeze through dry leaves. A rumor about a minor health code violation at a beloved local coffee shop. Suggestion that the vintage clothing store down the street was perhaps not quite up to current fire safety standards. Nothing overt, just enough to plant a seed of doubt, a tiny crack in the foundation of trust. Then his focus shifted to the properties. Thorne began making offers, not just on empty lots, but on the very buildings housing our independent businesses. The offers were generous, almost too good to be true, designed to tempt those who might be struggling or those weary of the daily grind. Many of my neighbors, facing rising costs and the endless demands of small business ownership, took the bait. They packed up their lives, their dreams, and moved on, often with a vague sense of unease, a feeling they couldn't quite articulate. He's just a shrewd businessman, they'd say, trying to rationalize the cold efficiency with which their legacies were being erased. But I refused. Alara's hearth was my legacy, my heart. My parents had started it, and I had poured my entire adult life into it. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a memory, a comfort, a purpose. Thorne's representative came to me first, polite but firm, offering a price that could have bought me a comfortable early retirement. I declined. Then Thorne himself visited, his smile a little tighter, his voice a little less jovial. "Ms. Vance," he'd purr, "you're holding up progress. Your little bakery, charming as it is preventing us from building something truly spectacular here." I stood my ground, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "My little bakery is home, Mr. Thorne. It's not for sale." That's when the campaign of subtle disparagement began in earnest, a slow, insidious poisoning of my reputation. It wasn't direct attacks, which would have been easy to counter. Instead, it was always veiled, always plausible deniability. A seemingly innocuous comment at a city council meeting about how some businesses in Hawthorne Place aren't quite meeting the expected standards for a revitalized district, presenting challenges for new investment. He wouldn't name names, of course, but everyone knew he meant places like mine, places that dared to resist him. Then came the concerned citizen complaints. Someone reported seeing a mouse near my dumpster, though my pest control records were immaculate. A sudden surge of online reviews, all five-star bombs for my competitors, interspersed with suspiciously vague two-star ratings for Alara's hearth. Bread was okay, but the atmosphere felt tired. Heard rumors about their ingredients, just a feeling. My loyal customers, initially confused, started to waver. Doubt, once planted, grows like a stubborn weed. The city inspections became more frequent, more stringent. Every crumb, every speck of dust was scrutinized. I was always compliant, but the sheer volume of inspections was disruptive, costly, and mentally exhausting. My flour distributor suddenly raised prices, citing unexpected supply chain issues that seemed to only affect my account. My coffee bean supplier, a small family business I'd used for 20 years, regretfully informed me they had to prioritize larger accounts. Thorn was pulling strings, tightening the noose, one invisible thread at a time. It felt like being caught in a spider's web, the strands almost invisible, but tightening, tightening, slowly suffocating. My regulars, bless their hearts, tried to stay loyal, but even they began to feel the pressure. Fewer people lingered, the laughter faded. The scent of baking bread, once a comfort, began to smell like desperation. My profits plummeted. I spent my nights staring at ledgers, watching the red ink bleed across the pages. My hands, once strong and nimble from kneading dough, now trembled with anxiety. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The joy, the purpose, everything I had built was crumbling before my eyes, piece by agonizing piece. The breaking point came when a story appeared in the local paper, a puff piece about Thorne's grand vision for Hawthorne Place, featuring quotes from satisfied former business owners who praised his fair dealings and visionary leadership. Buried deep within the article was a single sentence, tucked away like a venomous adder. Some existing establishments, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new economic realities, have unfortunately been unable to remain part of this exciting transformation. It was a death knell, echoing with the subtle disparagement that had already ruined so many others. That sentence, coupled with Thorne's triumphant smirk as he announced groundbreaking on a new luxury apartment complex where my bakery once stood, was the final blow. Ilara's hearth closed its doors, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The silence in the empty bakery was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively hum it had once held. I stood amidst the ghost of baking bread and laughter, surrounded by empty shelves, the air heavy with loss. My savings were gone, swallowed by rent, utilities, and the impossible demands of fighting an unseen enemy. My dreams, once so tangible, were now just ash. Julian Thorne had won. He always did. He moved through the city like a predator, leaving a trail of broken dreams and shattered lives, all while maintaining his pristine public facade. I spent weeks in a fog of despair, rarely leaving my tiny apartment above the bakery, which I was rapidly losing as well. The vibrant colors of Portland seemed dull, its reign a constant weep for my loss. I watched as Thorne's construction crews tore down buildings, replacing the unique character of Hawthorne Place with generic glass and steel. He was building his empire on the graves of our small businesses, and no one seemed to care, or rather, no one dared to speak up. It was during one of my darkest moments, scrolling through old news articles, trying to find some solace, that I stumbled upon a piece about Sylvie Beaumont, a chef who once owned a fusion restaurant called the Copper Pot on the other side of town. The article mentioned its sudden closure years ago, citing vague community concerns and a quiet but persistent campaign of unfavorable local commentary. The name Julian Thorne wasn't explicitly mentioned, but the description of the restaurant's downfall, the whispers, the subtle undermining, it was chillingly familiar. It was his signature move, the same insidious tactics he had used on me. A seed of something new, something fierce, began to germinate in the desolate landscape of my despair. He had done this before. He had gotten away with it before. My mind began to race, my hands clenching into fists. I would not let him get away with it again. He needed to be stopped, and as I stared at the screen, a chilling determination settled over me, replacing the numbness. I knew then that I needed to find Sylvie Beaumont. This wasn't just about my bakery anymore. This was about everyone he had crushed, everyone he had silenced. And it was then, in that moment of quiet resolve, that I made a mental note to myself, a whisper of a promise: subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. It felt like a bizarre, almost morbid, affirmation of the path I was about to embark upon. Finding Sylvie Beaumont wasn't easy. She had, in her own words, disappeared off the culinary map after the Copper Pot closed. It took weeks of discreet inquiries, sifting through old phone books, cross-referencing names, and countless dead ends. My savings were dwindling, but my resolve was burning brighter than ever. Finally, through a retired food critic who remembered the Copper Pot fondly, I got a lead. Sylvie lived quietly, not far from downtown, in a modest house with an impeccably maintained garden. When I first knocked on her door, I was nervous, my heart hammering against my ribs. What if she was bitter? What if she wanted nothing to do with revenge? What if she simply wanted to forget? A small, elegantly framed woman with sharp, discerning eyes and a silver braid pinned neatly at the back of her head answered. She was Sylvie Beaumont, all right, even at 58, there was an unmistakable aura of quiet strength about her. Her voice was low, calm, but it held a hidden current of steel. MS. Beaumont, my name is Alara Vance, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I owned Alara's Hearth, the bakery in Hawthorne Place. I think we have something in common. She invited me in, her gaze dissecting me, evaluating every nuance of my distress. Her living room was sparse but tasteful, filled with books and a few pieces of minimalist art. The air smelled faintly of ginger and something earthy, like well-tended soil. I sat on a simple wooden chair, recounting my story, the words tumbling out in a rush, each one laced with the bitterness of loss and betrayal. I told her about Thorn, about the insidious whispers, the manufactured complaints, the systematic dismantling of my livelihood. As I spoke, I watched her eyes. They held no surprise, only a deep knowing understanding. When I finished, the silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken pain. Julian Thorne, Sylvie finally said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He hasn't changed, not one bit. She then shared her own story, not with anger, but with a detached precision that was far more chilling. Her restaurant, the Copper Pot, had been a pioneer of Pacific Northwest fusion cuisine. Thorne, then just starting his ascent, had subtly disparaged its untraditional flavors within their shared community. He'd painted her as an outlier, a risk taker, while simultaneously praising the classic, dependable establishments he discreetly funded. He hadn't destroyed her outright. He had simply drained her dry, eroding her customer base with whispers of unreliability and unorthodoxy, slowly bleeding her dry until she couldn't sustain it anymore. He doesn't crush you directly, Alara, Sylvie explained, her voice a low murmur. He plants seeds of doubt, nurtures them, and lets fear and mistrust do his dirty work. He creates an atmosphere where people start to believe his version of reality, even when it's patently false. He thrives on subtle manipulation, not brute force. I looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not just a victim, but a survivor, one who had quietly observed Thorne's tactics for years. I want to fight back, Sylvie, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know how, but I can't let him keep doing this to people, to us. A flicker of something not hope, but perhaps a quiet satisfaction crossed her face. Revenge, Alara, she said almost to herself. It's a dish best served meticulously. She paused, her eyes meeting mine, a spark of shared purpose igniting between us. You came to the right place. I've been watching him quietly for years, waiting for the right moment. You, she declared, her voice firm, are the right moment. And just like that, Sylvie Beaumont became my unexpected strategic advisor, my quiet mentor in the grim art of revenge. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered strategy. She didn't console, she equipped. She taught me to see Thorn not as an insurmountable force, but as a system, a network of connections and vulnerabilities. She knew his patterns, his tells, the subtle ways he pulled his strings. Her discerning eye, her observant nature, and her quietly resourceful mind were exactly what I needed. Our war against Julian Thorne had officially begun. Our first task was reconnaissance. Sylvie insisted on it. Before you strike, she'd often say, you must know everything about your opponent. Every strength, every weakness, every hidden vice. She taught me how to read public records, how to trace corporate filings, how to sift through local news archives for buried details. We spent countless hours poring over documents, cross-referencing names, building a vast, interconnected web of Thorne's dealings. His public face was that of a benevolent developer, a man of progress and community. His private dealings, however, told a different story. We discovered shell corporations, dubious partnerships, and a pattern of acquiring properties just before favorable zoning changes were quietly approved by the city council. We found evidence of contractors being stiffed, small landowners being strong-armed into selling, and promises made to communities that were consistently broken. It was a masterpiece of legal but deeply unethical maneuvering, a vast network of greed masked by philanthropy. The more we uncovered, the more my initial outrage solidified into a cold, hard resolve. Thorne wasn't just a threat to small businesses. He was a cancer on the city, slowly consuming its soul. Our early attempts to expose him were met with predictable resistance. We tried anonymously tipping off local journalists, but the stories either never ran or were watered down to innocuous, unprovable accusations. Thorne's public relations machine was formidable, quick to dismiss any negativity as unsubstantiated attacks from disgruntled competitors. He had a powerful grip on the narrative, and he wasn't about to let it slip. He's too deeply embedded, Alara, Sylvie cautioned after another failed attempt. His roots run too deep within the city's power structures. We need more than just information. We need incontrovertible proof, and we need to expose him in a way that he cannot simply brush aside. The struggle was exhausting, emotionally and financially. My meager savings were dwindling further, spent on database access, legal consultations, and even hiring a discreet private investigator for a few days to verify some of our more outlandish theories. There were moments of despair, moments when I felt the old numbness creeping back in, moments when I questioned whether this fight was even worth it. Thorne seemed untouchable, basking in the glow of new development projects, hosting glitzy galas where he was praised as a visionary. He even announced a new incubator for local artisans in the very space where Alara's hearth had once stood, a bitter irony that twisted my gut. He wants you to give up, Alara? Sylvie would say, her voice calm but firm whenever she sensed my resolve wavering. She'd watch me with those discerning eyes, a silent challenge in their depths. That's how he wins, not by directly confronting you, but by wearing you down until you break. Don't break. She was right. Her quiet strength was my anchor, her unwavering focus a constant reminder of our shared objective. She became more than just an advisor. She became a silent partner, a co-conspirator driven by her own quiet desire for justice. My transformation was slow, agonizing, but inevitable. I shed the skin of the heartbroken baker and began to learn the cold calculus of strategy. Sylvie taught me patience, observation, and the importance of exploiting perceived weaknesses. We learned that Thorn, for all his cunning, had a monumental ego. He craved public adoration and control, and he abhorred anything that threatened his meticulously crafted image. This was his Achilles heel. His greatest strength, his public persona, was also his most vulnerable point. We started looking for former employees, disgruntled partners, anyone who had been chewed up and spit out by Thorn's machinations. It was a painstaking process, often leading to dead ends or individuals too terrified to speak. But slowly, gradually, we began to find them. There was Mark, a former accountant for Thorne's development firm, who hinted at irregular financial transfers. There was Clara, a retired city planner, who spoke of Thorne's uncanny ability to get permits fast-tracked, even for projects that seemed to violate established regulations. Each person was a small piece of the puzzle, but none had the complete picture, nor the courage to come forward publicly. They were all afraid, and rightfully so. Thorne had a reputation for making lives very difficult for those who crossed him. One evening, after another frustrating day of dead-end leads, I found myself poring over a forgotten box of old city newsletters. It was Sylvie who found it, tucked away in the very bottom, a faded article from 15 years ago. It detailed the groundbreaking of Thorne's very first major project, a residential complex on the outskirts of the city. The article also mentioned a small, local construction company that had been subcontracted for a significant portion of the work, but later went bankrupt mid-project, leaving Thorne free to seize their assets and complete the work at a massive profit. The company's name? Phoenix Rising Construction. Phoenix Rising, I muttered, tracing the words with my finger. That's a bit ironic, isn't it? A company named Phoenix Rising that burned to the ground. Sylvie's eyes narrowed. I remember that, she said quietly. It was quite the scandal at the time, though Thorne was never directly implicated. The owner, a man named Thomas Vance, committed suicide shortly after his company collapsed. The official story was financial distress and overwhelming debt. My breath hitched. Thomas Vance, my father, the world tilted. My hands flew to my mouth, a choked gasp escaping my lips. My father's death had always been a raw wound, a mystery steeped in pain. He had been a driven, ethical man, deeply proud of his small construction company. His sudden, inexplicable bankruptcy and subsequent suicide had shattered our family, leaving my mother and me adrift. I had always believed it was a tragic, isolated incident of business failure. But now, seeing it connected to Thorne, a cold dread, deeper than any I had ever known, seeped into my bones. My father, I whispered, the words barely audible. Thomas Vance was my father. Sylvie looked at me, her expression a mix of shock and profound sorrow. Ilara, she began, her voice soft, I am so sorry, I had no idea. But the shock quickly gave way to a surge of pure, incandescent rage. Thorne hadn't just taken my bakery, he had taken my father, too. He had ripped my family apart, then years later, returned to finish the job with me. The depth of his depravity, the calculated cruelty, was beyond anything I had imagined. My despair, which had threatened to consume me, was now transmuted into a searing, unquenchable fire. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was blood debt. It was justice for my father, for my mother, for the life he had stolen from us. We need to find out everything about Phoenix Rising Construction, I declared, my voice steady, imbued with a terrible new certainty. Every last detail, every document, every single person involved. My hands, which had trembled with anxiety, now felt strong, steady, ready for war. The stakes had just soared beyond anything I could have imagined. And as I stared at the faded newspaper, a chilling determination settled over me, a promise to the ghost of my father. I was coming for Thorne, and I would not rest until every secret he buried was unearthed. The thought, subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily, played in my mind, not as a desperate plea, but as a silent declaration of war. The revelation about my father ignited a new, darker fire within me. What had been a fight for justice for my bakery and Sylvie's restaurant now became a deeply personal crusade for vindication, for the memory of a man I loved. Thorne hadn't just destroyed businesses, he had destroyed lives, and my own family had been among his earliest casualties. This knowledge fueled every waking moment, every desperate search through dusty archives, Every late-night conversation with Sylvie, we dug deeper into the Phoenix Rising construction case. It was like peeling back layers of old, dried paint, revealing the rot beneath. We found the original contracts, the detailed accounting records, the correspondence between Phoenix Rising and Thorne's then fledgling development firm. It showed a pattern of deliberate delay of payments from Thorne's side, escalating demands for changes without compensation, and ultimately, a sudden, inexplicable withdrawal of a critical line of credit that Phoenix Rising had relied upon. It was a systematic strangulation, designed to push my father's company into bankruptcy. And when it finally collapsed, Thorne swooped in, acquiring the half-finished project and all of Phoenix Rising's assets for pennies on the dollar. The official ruling of suicide for my father's death was due to overwhelming debt. The narrative was neat, tidy, and devastatingly effective, but we found inconsistencies, small cracks in the official story. A letter from my father to his lawyer dated days before his death, expressing frantic concern about Thorne's predatory tactics and mentioning threats of legal action if he didn't comply with revised, impossible deadlines. A financial statement showing that while Phoenix Rising was indeed struggling, it had secured a new, promising contract just weeks before its collapse, a contract that inexplicably vanished from all public records. Sylvie, with her sharp, observant mind, noticed a pattern of witnesses and experts who always seemed to materialize at Thorne's convenience, subtly shifting narratives, confirming his version of events. She suggested we look for the people around Thorne, the ones who benefited, the ones who enabled him. One name kept popping up in the Phoenix Rising documents, a junior lawyer named Kenneth Davies, who had handled much of the initial contract work for Thorne and then abruptly left the firm shortly after my father's death. He disappeared from the legal scene, Sylvie noted, tracing the name on an old roster. Then, a few years later, he resurfaced quietly as an in-house counsel for a major corporate firm, always keeping a low profile. This was unusual. Lawyers don't typically just vanish and then reappear in lesser, hidden roles. He knows something, Alara, Sylvie concluded. Or he did something, he's the loose thread. Kenneth Davies was our new target. Finding him was a challenge. He was a ghost, intentionally so, but Sylvie was relentless. She used her old contacts in the restaurant world, knowing that lawyers often frequented high-end establishments. We pieced together his habits, his favorite haunts, his routines. He was a creature of habit, meticulous and risk-averse. This was his weakness. We decided to approach him subtly, not with accusations, but with information. Sylvie crafted a letter, seemingly innocuous, from a fictional historical preservation society, inquiring about specific archival documents related to the Phoenix Rising project, claiming they were needed for a historical exhibit on Portland's early development. It was a long shot, but it worked. Davies, ever the precise lawyer, responded with a polite, albeit terse, refusal, stating the documents were proprietary and long since sealed. But his response confirmed he was still connected to that past. The next step was more direct. I waited for him outside his office building one rainy Portland evening, umbrella in hand, looking like any other person caught in the downpour. As he emerged, his head down, I stepped forward. "Mr. Davies?" I asked, my voice calm. He looked up, startled. "Yes, my name is Alara Vance," I said, meeting his gaze directly. My father was Thomas Vance. He owned Phoenix Rising Construction. His face drained of color. He visibly recoiled, his eyes darting around frantically as if searching for an escape route. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, trying to brush past me. "Oh, I think you do," I countered, my voice hardening. "I know about the contracts. I know about the delays. And I know about the line of credit that mysteriously vanished. And I know Julian Thorne destroyed my father's life. Did you help him, Mr. Davies? Did you help him kill my father?" He flinched at the word kill. His composure shattered. He was a man consumed by fear and guilt, and that was exactly what we needed. He was not a Thorne. He was a lesser man, a man who had made a terrible choice out of fear or greed, and then tried to bury it. Over the next few weeks, through a series of tense, clandestine meetings, Kenneth Davies slowly, reluctantly, spilled his guts. He hadn't known Thorne would drive my father to suicide, he insisted, but he had been pressured, threatened even, into fabricating documents, altering timelines, and drafting predatory clauses designed to bankrupt Phoenix Rising. He provided us with copies of real, authentic internal memos, emails, and even recordings of conversations with Thorne, all carefully hidden away for years, an insurance policy against Thorne ever turning on him. These were the smoking guns we had been searching for. They implicated Thorne not just in civil fraud, but potentially in criminal conspiracy, and even indirectly in my father's death. The evidence was irrefutable. With Kenneth Davies' testimony and the trove of documents, we finally had the leverage we needed. Sylvie, ever the strategist, outlined the final phase of our plan. It wouldn't be a quiet legal battle. It would be a public execution of Thorne's reputation, orchestrated to coincide with his biggest moment of triumph. He was set to announce his latest, most ambitious project, a massive urban revitalization initiative featuring a new state of the art arts center at a grand press conference attended by the mayor, city council members, and prominent philanthropists. This was our stage. We had two main objectives: expose his pattern of predatory behavior and link him directly to my father's death. We compiled a dossier, a meticulous narrative of his crimes, complete with the irrefutable evidence provided by Davies and our own painstaking research. Sylvie arranged for anonymous leaks to several independent journalists, making sure the information would surface just before the press conference, creating a buzz that Thorne's PR team couldn't immediately squash. We wanted the seeds of doubt, once Thorne's weapon, to be turned against him. We wanted the attendees of his grand announcement to arrive with questions, with a sense of unease. The day of the press conference dawned gray and drizzly, a fitting backdrop for the storm we were about to unleash. I arrived early, dressed inconspicuously, blending into the crowd of media and invited guests. Sylvie was already there, perched quietly in the back, her face serene, her eyes sharp, scanning the room. We exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod. This was it. Thorne strode onto the stage, beaming, a picture of success and philanthropy. The mayor offered effusive praise. Photographers' flashes popped. He began his speech, his voice resonant, his words painting a picture of a benevolent visionary shaping Portland's future. It was sickening. But then, as he reached the crescendo of his speech, poised to unveil the architectural renderings of his magnificent arts center, a murmur rippled through the audience. A few reporters, clutching their phones, began to whisper amongst themselves. The anonymous leaks had landed. One brave local reporter, known for his tenacity, raised his hand, interrupting Thorne's practiced flow. "Mr. Thorne, a question, if you please. There are some serious allegations circulating about your past dealings, specifically concerning Phoenix Rising Construction and the tragic death of its owner, Thomas Vance. Can you comment?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Thorne's practiced smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, searching the room for the source of the leak for the traitor. "Those are baseless rumors," he declared, his voice a little too sharp. "Disgruntled parties attempting to smear my reputation." "Baseless, Mr. Thorne?" I heard Sylvie's calm, clear voice cut through the rising murmurs. She wasn't standing, wasn't drawing attention to herself, but her voice carried, imbued with a quiet authority that silenced the room. "Are the sworn affidavits of former employees, detailing your systematic financial strangulation of small businesses, baseless? Are the leaked recordings of you coercing your lawyer, Kenneth Davies, into fabricating documents, baseless?" Thorne's face turned ashen. He recognized the name Davies, and his eyes shot to Sylvie, a flash of pure hatred in their depths. He knew her, or at least he knew of her, another one of his quiet casualties who had now returned to haunt him. The room erupted in a cacophony of questions. Reporters surged forward, their cameras flashing. The mayor looked visibly uncomfortable, trying to distance himself from the unfolding disaster. "These are lies," Thorne bellowed, his composure completely gone. "Slander, I will sue every one of you." But it was too late. I stepped forward then, moving through the crowd, my voice clear and strong. "Julian Thorne didn't just destroy my bakery. He destroyed my father, Thomas Vance, 15 years ago. He drove him to his death just as he tried to destroy every small business that stood in his way, including Sylvie Beaumont's restaurant. He is a predator, a liar, and a fraud, and we have the proof." I held up a slim binder, filled with the documents, the affidavits, the transcripts that Kenneth Davies had provided. It was a carefully curated package, designed to be easily digestible for the media, irrefutable evidence of a pattern of abuse. Sylvie had insisted on it. I walked to the edge of the stage, placing the binder directly in front of the scrum of eager reporters. They snatched it up, flipping through the pages, their faces growing grim as they absorbed the damning evidence. The climax was swift and brutal. Thorne's carefully constructed empire of goodwill crumbled in moments. The mayor quickly issued a statement expressing grave concerns and promising a full investigation. Investors, spooked by the sudden revelations, began pulling out of his projects. The news channels, initially hesitant, now had undeniable proof of his decades-long pattern of unethical, borderline criminal behavior. His name, once synonymous with progress, became a byword for predatory greed. The legal fallout was immense. The evidence from Davies, coupled with new testimonies from other victims emboldened by our exposé, led to a cascade of lawsuits and criminal investigations. Thorne, stripped of his power, his reputation in tatters, faced not just financial ruin but likely jail time. He was no longer the untouchable titan of industry. He was a broken, humiliated man, his public persona shattered beyond repair in the aftermath. The silence around Hawthorne Place was different. It wasn't the deafening silence of despair, but a quiet hum of renewal of cautious hope. My bakery, Alara's hearth, remained closed. I didn't have the heart or the funds to rebuild it, not yet anyway. But the act of revenge of finally exposing Thorn had provided a different kind of healing. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about reclaiming truth, about holding the powerful accountable, and about finding justice for my father and all the others he had wronged. Sylvie and I sat together weeks later, sipping tea in her quiet garden. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. She looked peaceful, a quiet satisfaction etched on her face. He got what he deserved, Alara, she said, her voice soft. It wasn't pretty, but it was just. I nodded, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The bitterness still lingered, a faint echo of the pain, but it was no longer consuming. No, it wasn't pretty, I agreed, a faint smile touching my lips. But it was necessary, and it was finished. Our revenge wasn't a sudden, explosive triumph. It was a carefully orchestrated demolition, piece by painful piece, until the entire structure of his lies collapsed. It had cost me almost everything, but it had given me something far more valuable: vindication, peace, and the profound satisfaction of knowing I had righted a terrible wrong, not just for myself, but for the quiet, forgotten victims like my father and Sylvie. The world felt a little bit safer, a little bit fairer, now that Julian Thorne's reign of quiet terror had finally ended. And as I looked out at the blossoming garden, a profound sense of closure settled over me. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.